So in recent developments, I've just bought myself a light, a Godox. There you go. It's the Godox VL152. Very beautiful looking item. My first professional piece of film equipment I've ever purchased in my life. We don't talk about lights much here. So I was thinking we could have a chat about how I can get familiar with this, parameters with which I can evaluate it, and how I can evaluate any other lights. How do we choose and understand the fixtures that we shoot with? When we shot our shorts, I just got a Fresnel light and was like, this is a light. And I pointed at the stuff. I don't know anything about it. I think it'll be helpful for us to know the secret life of a light, what's going on under the hood.
Oh, you'll like this. I started with my advanced cinematography class this last time around, keeping an open document that's called rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than kind of stray too far down a path of a topic, we put it in that document to revisit so we don't get sidetracked in the immediate here and now. Yeah, I guess this, dear audience, viewer, listener, is a fair warning. Here be rabbits.
Here be rabbits. And I've got a bit of a cheat.
Okay, all right, go.
The viewer doesn't know this, but about 300 years ago, you and I recorded a very similar episode to this. We chucked it in the bin because I had no lighting set up and no microphone at the time. And I think your voice was like high-pitched through the entirety of the episode.
Because someone did absolutely not set the sampling frequency wrong. No.
If we had like a Patreon or something, we would be like, oh, yeah, no, pay extra money for this piece of shit episode that we put in the bin. So I have a few background theoretical parameters that we've run through. I think all our rabbit holes exist within them. We've got the rabbit hole that is output, power draw, beam size, beam quality, beam control, barn door cut, shadow definition, color, and logistics and handling. Those are all rabbit holes, which I'm assuming we're going to explore today. But first things first, I did in fact finish In the Blink of an Eye today. And today is April the 7th. And today that we said I would finish reading In the Blink of an Eye, a perspective on film editing by Walter Murch. The punishment, if I didn't finish it, was to trash, like to make a Dune hate, like Denis Villeneuve and Greg Fraser personal attack post on my socials, which was, in hindsight, very elaborate. I no longer have to do that, which is excellent.
Punishment would have been to denounce the next word. I'm not entirely sure because I've only been reading it. How do you actually pronounce Fremen?
Denounce the Fremen?
Mm.
That would be very surreal. I don't have time for surrealism on my Ethan Steele DP Instagram page. Also, another digression before we get started. Damn it, this is supposed to look easy.
There's a little release latch.
I was pushing down the release latch. I was just turning it the wrong way. I was doing another stupid thing. Look at that. Isn't that excellent? You can just chop and change as you please. I don't have to wrap a softbox around anything. I was saying to myself, this is my last big equipment purchase for a long time because I'm a firm believer in buying very few things and getting as much as I can out of them. I've had this camera for a very long time. I'm using it more than I have ever in my entire life. This is not going to be the case with this one. I'm going to see so many accessories for this and burn away all of my money. And it's going to be very embarrassing. And they're all going to gather dust, but it's going to happen. So this is a new Tamagotchi pet of mine. I'm going to be customizing the shit out of this. Anyway, let's get to business.
My word to start is, what do you need the light to do?
Well,
work
it's a great question. I need the light to not only support images that I can use to test my camera and lighting setups and patterns and keep my brain on the pulse of lighting at all times. However, it's also hopefully going to be the workhorse light for very small scale independent productions with my pals. Obviously, one light is never enough for that kind of thing, but it's better than no lights. We had this unspoken agreement of just kind of assembling our equipment together, which you actually encouraged us to do back in the JMC days, to everyone buy a certain piece of equipment and then we all use it in harmony. So one of them has a Blackmagic 6K Pro, and I'm the guy with the light. Beautiful. So yeah, it does need to function as a workhorse light with a pocket cinema camera.
So then, I guess, how do you define a horse? And more specifically in this context, what's this workhorse need to do?
This workhorse, my primary concern actually, I want this workhorse to be able to support large diffusion. That's my game going forward. Big pieces of diffusion fairly far away. And I'm very uncertain. So I've never been able to do it with just one light. This is going to be a bit less bright than most of the ones that I've used. JMC, to the best of my knowledge, it's not a hugely bright light. Desirably, this horse / light will be able to sustainably be bounced and diffused on large sources that are fairly far away. If not, that's fine. I can live without that. But I think it's essential to like my learning and development that I start using like large sources. If it can't do that,
okay.
yeah, hopefully it can support large sources and obviously expose things correctly. I think one of my big focuses that I kind of am afraid of is that going forward, everything that I make, I kind of want to avoid the YouTube look. And I think if I can diagnose the YouTube look, it's stuff shot on a decent camera but with not enough light. So
when you say enough light, are you talking in terms of illumination level? Are you talking in terms of tenebrism and separation? What are we talking?
The first one, because that's where my brain hears brightness. The ability to kind of expose things sustainably and without any grain or noise or ugliness. Yeah, that's kind of what I want to do. I realize it's probably not going to be super sustainable with this light. I don't think I'll be able to carry a lot of crazy diffusion with one LED, but it's better than nothing. That's all. That's all I need from this light so far.
Let's digest that a little further then. Generally, my advice is rather than saying use type A of light in situation X, use brand B, whatever, in situation Y. That is not a particularly efficient way of learning, because then every time you meet a situation that isn't X or Y or Z, then you need to seek out advice again, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So rather than kind of go choose equipment by scenario, because there's an endless amount of scenarios, what you need from any given scenario can be broken down into some parameters that make it easier to choose.
Right.
And those are kind of what we alluded to earlier. So when working with larger sources, if we take this right back to basics, how do we create a larger source?
We create a larger source by bouncing it or diffusing it.
Bouncing would be to shine the light on a matte bright surface, and that matte bright surface, like cardboard or a painted wall or something along the way, would then become the source, and hence the sources become larger. Diffusion is some kind of translucent material that spreads the light out. So when we shine through the diffusion material, we get a larger circle of light than...
Well, that sucks. Hang on. Sorry.
A larger circle of light than the USB cable.
Apparently handle. I just tried to turn my camera towards my softbox to give our viewer a basic understanding of what diffusion was, and the USB cable decided that was not going to happen. So
cable says no.
Guess you'll never know. This is bounce, this wall, and what's on my side here is diffusion.
On a very basic level, then, there are similarities between the two. Number one is that we take the original amount of light and we spread it out. So I guess in both cases, both diffusion and bounce, and then cinematographer's secret sauce, well, not so secret anymore. It used to be secret like 30 years ago, I suppose. The magic of combining bounce and diffusion for the booklight.
The booklight.
Both bounce and diffusion can be seen as forms of indirect lighting. So from the subject's perspective, we no longer see the light fixture. So when it shines through the diffusion material, it's almost impossible from the subject's position to tell what the fixture is behind the diffusion material. So think like a heavy frosted shower curtain or something along those lines, for those who aren't familiar with that. And once we're bouncing it, once we're shining it off another surface and repurposing that surface to become the source, then again, we as a subject don't necessarily know what is lighting up that surface. We don't necessarily know what the fixture is. A starting point being indirect means that we lose output.
Yes, which is what I'm worried about a lot.
So I think that one of the starting points is like, how much punch or juice do I need? How much output do I need? And part of the reason why in the instance of bounce that we get less output, less brightness on subject is the light has to travel from the light fixture, then it has to travel to the surface that we're lighting up to become the new light source, and then it has to travel from that bounce surface to the subject. So you very quickly double the distance the light has to travel. And not only are you taking like a smaller cone of light that can hit the subject, you're taking that and spreading that same cone over a bigger area to create a larger source. If you think about it like a garden hose with a shower head like nozzle function, like if you concentrate it, you're going to get more water in the smaller area, right? But if you spread it to a wider shower, then you're going to get fewer droplets per square millimeter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And same, we're taking a narrow cone of light. When we spread it out over the larger bounce surface, then the light that is hitting each square millimeter, square centimeter, square meter of the bounce surface gets less. We are increasing the distance and we're diluting the amount of light we're putting out there. All kind of leads to less light reaching the subject.
And diffusion does a little bit less diluting, doesn't it? Depending on the thickness of depending on the density of the material, I think.
Generally, when we bounce, we tend to use surfaces that don't absorb as much light. So there's less variation in how much light actually gets bounced back to the subject.
Right, yeah.
Theoretically, you can use a diffusion material, and that often does happen. A certain knighted someone.
I love that we're taking the Voldemort approach to Sir Roger Deakins right now. It's like, don't be afraid, don't be scared.
Muslin is, I guess, originally was intended as a diffusion material.
Muslin isn't what's used. That's not what we call it here, is it? Something else.
Now you've got me. I have to look that up every single time.
Yeah, so do I.
Something C, not cotton drill. Yeah, I'll need to. Anyway, which means that it's not particularly efficient as a bounce material. Because when you think about it, if the material is translucent enough to use as diffusion, that means some light has to be able to travel through.
Yeah.
Right? That means whatever light travels through is never going to bounce back to our subject. So the more light can travel through, the more that can be transmitted, the less light is going to be bounced back the other way. So something like a sheet of artboard, foam core.
This stuff has been keeping me alive for such a long time.
It's going to be a much more effective bounce material. So can you see?
Yeah, yes, very well, actually, yeah.
Because unlike muslin or diffusion material, it's not letting any light through. It's not absorbing much. Most of the light just bounces straight back off.
Yeah.
So in terms of bounce and diffusion materials, if you use something like foam core, if you use something like styrofoam, or in the best of worlds, something like ultra bounce, then
ultra bounce.
Yeah, so that's a purpose-made bounce material.
That's like the kind of thing you get on a pop-out photography one?
No, this is more exclusive, more, what's the word you use? Bougie?
Bougie, yeah.
Etsy?
Now I'm curious to see
that
Etsy.
So more exclusive?
I haven't. No, I've only heard bougie. I thought you said Etsy for a second.
This is now more like a early noughts thing, I think.
Now I'm very curious to see
Etsy as an exclusive.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
So this is before Etsy, the website?
Before the website Etsy, the one that like sells you 50-50 chance like
exclusive
products. Yeah.
Stuff, right?
Right, yeah.
So ultra bounce is film industry specific.
Right. Okay.
For the best balance between gain, as in how much light does it return,
and how much light does it pass
versus how glossy and directional it is.
Oh, all right.
Because obviously, like a mirror would return the maximum.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't actually create a bigger source. It just redirects whatever you're shining on.
Which brings me on to my next question, because the second you brought that bounce up to your face, I remember that a while back I bought my own fold-out photography style bounce, 73-in-1 style circle thing, and I'm curious to see what would happen if I put my gold bounce here, or my gold reflector. In my experience, I've gotten more output from a reflector, but it has huge drawbacks. Like you just said, it's less glossy, less directional. If it's crumpled, you see the crumple in the light.
Sorry, when you say less, you mean more?
Less what?
So you were saying less directional, less output?
Yeah, sorry, much more output, much more directional.
Right. Just make sure that we are aligning the planets and the stars and everything in the, like we're not breaking the universe, the space-time continuum or anything.
Can I just hang on? I'm going to get up for a second and do a quick experiment with my gold bounce to see how it looks. Bear with me.
See?
Well, that's excellent timing right there.
That's what happened. We broke space-time.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
I have caused a series of events that have made my entire setup fall apart. I don't know if this experiment's going to work. Because back in the day when I did my shorts, I had to bounce sunlight from like a huge distance because we were doing a wide shot, but I still wanted to fill in the subject's face a little bit. I ended up using a gold bounce, which really annoyed the actor, and it was great. It was really, really effective. But every other context when I've used a gold bounce has been like hideous. Like, especially for like close-ups where the gold bounce is quite close to the person's face. I like that it warms it up a lot, but there's a lot of hot spots from unless I'm just using it wrong. But yeah, what do you think are the big differences between reflecting light and bouncing light? Explain why I see it while I see if I can do this.
That's kind of like asking what's the difference between the moon and the sun.
Oh dear.
To explore that may need to be something that we revisit. So do you want to make a note for us, please? We want to revisit specular versus diffuse reflections.
Wow, that's scary.
Back to what do I need or what do I want from my light fixture if I want to bounce or diffuse? So obviously we want more output because we lose intensity by bouncing or diffusing, or even worse, when we go book light, so we bounce first and then diffuse, then we really lose output.
Which ideally is what I want to do because it's great. Book lights are excellent.
Because we want to make a larger beam, we want to make use of a larger beam. We also want to think about the beam size and particularly the beam angle in that regard, as in like it's going to be easier to create that bigger illuminated area on our bounce or our diffusion material if the beam angle is wider. If it's narrower, then we're going to need to pull our light fixture further back to
loses even more output.
But then, we're not spreading, so it's kind of like a trade-off. Compared to direct or hard lighting, as in where we're not diffusing or bouncing, the beam quality, the field evenness, any kind of odd textures or irregularities in the beam aren't going to count as much as if we're trying to use the light source directly without any diffusion or bounce. So something that you will find, do you remember the distinction between an open face and a Fresnel light fixture? This would be going way back into the depths, the mists of time called trimester 1 of your time at JMC.
If I recall, the redheads were open face. Right. But the trade-off was that because they're open face, they have this mesh in front of them, which kind of adds this weird kind of like a pocky look to the beam.
Yeah.
For several reasons. The redhead was really hideous when it was used as hard light, but that was just one of the issues with it.
The other one is that with an open face, you're always going to get a double shadow.
How come?
You get one shadow from the globe and one shadow from the reflector.
Well, that happened with this because it isn't really a globe, but we've got the LEDs, and then attached to the front of it, the reflector.
That was a yes to the double shadow. LED manufacturers are at the entry level selling in a market that is fiercely competitive and where numbers can deceive the eye for a while. So something you are finding with a lot of these entry level Bowens mount cob LEDs.
Sorry, I was just mentioning an unrelated incident prior to recording this, where I definitely did not call this a PL mount. That didn't happen. Bowens mount.
Sorry? What was that?
Bowens mount.
So a lot of entry-level Bowens mount reflectors are designed into being something called a hyper reflector.
I see that.
And the end result is very often that you get an extreme hotspot in the middle of the beam.
Oh, I see.
In order to increase the photometric reading.
Why do we want to increase the photometric reading? Is that for marketing?
Because the number looks more impressive on the spec sheet.
Okay. Damn it. I was hoping it was something good, but I was worried that it was going to be the cynical thing where they're just like, oh, yeah, our light can do this.
If you can concentrate a lot of your light, put right bang center in the beam, and you only measure in the beam, then the light output is going to look higher on paper.
That's just lame.
But this is what I'm saying, like in this competitive entry-level market where people don't understand yet, then how are you going to distinguish between two competing products?
I'm happy that I watched a review for this before I bought it, because I feel like otherwise I would have been duped by a lot of things.
The hyperreflector is, in my opinion, mostly...
Hyperreflector. Mostly
and it's not that I'm frozen. I still got internet connection. I just want to try and find a way that doesn't sound too...
Are you trying to say mostly a scam?
I probably find it more frustrating than enabling and empowering.
Okay, I'm glad that I know that. I mean, I'm definitely going to do tests and like post them and stuff, but that's I did kind of suspect that. I remember looking at this thing, you know, when I put my hands on it and turn it around and everything, and I thought, sure, this is going to disperse the light a little bit, but there's still a gaping hole in the middle, and the light is still going to come straight out of it.
Depending on the setup, in the book light doesn't really matter all that much. Depending on the size of the setup, doesn't necessarily always matter so much in a bounce. Where you can see it is diffusion, which can kind of work when you want that mixed diffuse quality, or you're kind of wrapping a harder shadow inside a softer one. But it is one of those kind of things that 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, I would prefer a more even beam, and I would prefer a slightly wider beam than what most hyper reflectors give.
Right.
Somewhere in the region between like a 40 to 60 degree beam angle, I find is a nice kind of sweet spot for bounce and diffusion.
The angle at which you cast the beam.
Beam angle.
Okay, so 40 to 60 degrees.
40 is on the pretty narrow side, I find. Kind of 55 is a really good place to be. Wider than 60 is kind of... So in terms of diffuse quality, the size of the source... So if we look at something like that, can you see how the same physical size... I'm doing this partly for the benefit of the viewer, because I think we haven't really gone through soft light theory yet properly.
No.
But can you see, if I take this same size modifier, this bounce, and move it closer, can we see how it fills a bigger proportion of the screen?
Yeah.
So it appears bigger. And I can take the same physical size, and if I move it further away, it appears smaller.
And this is where we get to the really annoying, finicky partiality of light being linked with relative size. Not size, but relative size.
One more element to that, even the apparent size is also dependent on how evenly do we fill the bounce or diffusion.
Which I feel like is the issue here, that I will not be able to, with a certain beam size, not be able to like evenly fill the whole bounce.
With a narrower beam, you need to have the light fixture further away,
and you lose output
to fill the same. And sometimes that may even be like physically impossible to pull it that much further back. And that's where I would say like 40 degrees beam angle is starting to become on the limit of like what is feasible, like practically feasible in most locations, where you kind of need to start thinking about going to 2 fixtures rather than 1 to fill the same size modifier.
Oh, okay. So that beam angle is being used to allow for enough space for 2 fixtures as well.
Here's the dichotomy about this. So there is drawbacks with a beam angle that's too narrow, because then you're going to have to start pulling the light fixture back. And the dichotomy is that technically it's easier to fill a bounce or a diffusion more evenly,
the narrower,
if we pull the light source much further back.
Oh, okay.
If we look at the modifier from the side, and let's say we had a vertical top-down source, our subject, and here we have a diffusion here, and we've got a light source here somewhere. Now think about the arc that the light is traveling at. Can you see, if I put my light source here really close to my diffuser, from the center of my light source straight down, the shortest distance is about there, right? To the center of the diffusion. Now let's say this diffusion was from my fingertip to my elbow. At that distance, what's the distance from my light source to the tip of my fingers?
It's huge relative
Hence,
to the...
that's going to fall off much more, or this area closest to the diffusion is going to get much brighter.
Yeah, which
now,
is going to be
if
a
I pull
huge...
further back,
sorry, go on.
can you see how that arc of distances the light source has, the light has to travel from the light source is shallower?
They even out a little bit.
Yes.
That's going to be a nuisance, given that, as we just discussed, with its hyper-reflector on, this already has a built-in hotspot. So I'm going to be compensating for that a lot.
Yes.
Epic.
It might be worth investigating in like really cheap non-hyper reflectors, if that makes sense.
All right. I didn't even know what that looks like.
So you'd be looking at something like a 6 or 7 inch. And usually, unfortunately, at that end of the budget scale, they don't really list the beam angle. Plus, the beam angle is going to depend on the individual light fixture, exactly where is the light emitting element placed relative to the actual Bowens mount. But, like we are potentially talking reflectors of like $15, $20, $30 here.
That's not horrible. Am I getting your definition of beam angle wrong? Because
what do you mean?
When you say beam angle, I think to myself...
If we think in lens terms, that would be the equivalent to field of view.
Okay, I get you now. I was wrong when you were saying it earlier, but I understand what you're saying now. I will have to look into that and see what the beam angle is here. I just did not know what that was. We mentioned it.
Most hyper reflectors are kind of in the between 40 to 60, somewhere in that range.
Oh, okay.
Something that I haven't experimented with, but might be worth experimenting with, is to borrow from a beauty dish modifier. I think you might be muted.
No, I whispered to myself just then. I was going to say, what is that again? I've just forgotten. Oh, those look great. Oh, okay. So it's a reflector that actively blocks the main beam.
The main hotspot, yes.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I love that.
If you are looking mainly at soft light applications, then I think it might be worth also investigating and investing in umbrella modifiers.
Good old umbrella modifiers.
I believe your fixture should have an integrated umbrella holder. I believe if you look at the front, if you face the front towards me.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah, so that's spring-loaded.
Can you guys see that, folks?
No, we can't.
Well, there's a little hole right here.
And it's spring-loaded, so when you push your umbrella shaft through, it stays in place.
Excellent. So umbrella shaft and maybe a beauty dish.
So there are different size umbrellas. There's shoot-through, silver reflective, and white bounce.
Yeah.
Probably a good starting point would be silver reflective. Then you get 2 options. You can either get like a diffusion cover for it, so it becomes more like a standard softbox.
Yeah, that is fair enough.
Or you can use it as just a giant reflector.
Yeah.
For a bigger diffusion.
Sounds very versatile. I think versatility is what I'm looking for here right now.
Technically, if you want to try really much bigger, then in theory, if you go a white bounce and quite a big umbrella, then you are making the bounce and the fixture part of the booklight into one, and all you would need would be the diffusion.
Excellent.
So, for example, 6-foot and 7-foot white bounce umbrellas are reasonably accessible and reasonably affordable.
First one I found was actually very expensive. It's $100, but I think I'll be getting that one.
Oh, sorry. I'm talking relative to something like a 6-foot by 6-foot ultra bounce or an 8-foot by 8-foot ultra bounce.
Which I'm sure is like $500 a pop.
Yes, it would be quite a bit more than that.
I think I'll stick with the umbrella by the sounds of it when I get to it. I have an idea now of how I should be using this, mostly just to compensate for the hotspot. I'm very conscious of output. In my ongoing tests, I'm going to see how, it's going to depend entirely on the source, but I'm probably going to using my new little light meter, like measure foot candles basically every time I use it.
Photometrics.
Not photo imperials.
To compare light sources in terms of output, it's been standardized that we read them at 1 meter away from the light emitting element.
Oh, okay. So if I want to perform like a base level test, I just turn this on, point it at whatever I'm using to measure the light, and then measure it 1 meter away.
You will find that when you measure dead center, I just have a little look at like how far do you need to move it to each side of dead center before you drop at least 50% in output.
Right.
That will tell you how much of a hotspot you're dealing with.
Yeah. I'm very scared now. I'm afraid to see how it turns out.
And there should be photometric information online already. If you look up your model number, Godox, whatever, and then photometrics, that should already give you an idea. So this is where you've got all the components really necessary to start getting into the RE Photometrics app.
Let's see if this is on Android, because whenever we went in advanced cinematography,
it is.
Yes, excellent. Okay,
and it's free.
It's free?
Yes, RE actually makes stuff for free.
It's horrifying. What world do we live in?
If we look at the RE650 plus the 650 watt Fresnel.
Is that LED or tungsten? Oh, tungsten.
We go full flood. We can set the distance to 3.28 feet. So that's 1 meter in imperial.
This is great.
And it gives us roughly 1,200 foot candles.
Full flood. Huh. I'm getting 10,000. I definitely have the settings wrong.
Are you in metric?
Oh, imperial. I didn't know foot candles were imperial. Yeah, I'm getting. Yes. Okay, I'm getting 950. Yeah,
so to get the 1 meter reading, we need to convert it to feet. So that's 3.28 foot the distance.
Right. Okay. Yep. I'm getting the same reading. That's good.
And this took me forever and a day to figure out myself. You don't have to slide it to get to the exact distance. If you double tap the distance, you can actually type directly in.
Excellent.
This took me 6 years of using this app to actually figure out, I think.
Gotta learn somehow.
Yeah, that was such a moment in my everyday life.
So if I were to conduct tests with this, back in the day, I'll just speed through them. We ran through a couple in our unreleased episode, not unreleased because it's exclusive, but unreleased because it sucked.
Let's just call it unrealized rather than unreleased.
The unrealized episode. We mentioned a few parameters to figure out what you need. This is the questions you can apply to your light.
We've kind of touched on 3 of them.
We touched on output, beam size, and beam quality, maybe? Not really.
Beam evenness, beam quality, yeah.
Yeah. So if I want to test those things, testing output sounds pretty, you just explained it to me. A meter away, read it with foot candles. There you go. Testing power draw, don't need to do that. I know how much power this draws, 150 watts. It's in the name. That's the best thing about beam size. I'm fairly certain I can just test that by putting the reflector on and then wait, hang on, no. What distance from, I'm making the assumption that you measure beam size by pointing it at something and measuring the diameter of the whole beam.
Yeah.
What distance away? Is it a meter again?
Well, I would probably go a little bit further, but it really does depend on then, like, you're going to do some triangle maths.
Awesome.
Technically, what we're dealing with is the distance from 50% drop off to 50% drop off on the other hand. Now, this is where the hyper reflector is going to get a little dicey because that drop off is going to happen very quickly and you're still going to have a visible beam that's much wider. But yeah, I think like if you start going to where you start seeing the edges feather and consider that as your beam width, being as close as 1 meter, I don't think is going to be very practical because it's going to be a lot more difficult to see where does the edge start dropping off. So all you need to consider is like if that's the base, as in the bottom of your triangle, your camera.
When you say camera, do you mean fixture?
Yeah, sorry, fixture is at the top of your triangle. So when you plug this into a triangle calculator, then the base is your diameter. And you got 2 ways of doing this. You can either do it as a half of the triangle. So you consider this distance as one side of a right-sided triangle.
Fixture, right? Okay. So we've got the wall is the base.
Yeah.
Then this is a side.
Is
the
distance, the height. Yeah.
It's the height. Then there's the fixture. And then you got to calculate for that.
So if you calculate that as a right-sided triangle, then you're calculating half the beam width.
Yeah.
Then you need to double the degrees.
Yeah, to get your beam angle.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just writing down for this one. Point the light at a wall. Do Pythagoras and trigonometry.
I've been cheating and doing this wrong for decades, apparently. I just got put right by a student. So this is probably my first act in counteracting the kind of not so charitable top 5 film student fails episode. Film students have taught me plenty.
We need to do the second act of that, where here's what I've learned from all the plucky young film students.
Yeah, I've been doing beam angles wrong for decades because I've been cheating and trying to do them lazily rather than actually looking up how it should be done.
So we test output by holding a light meter away from it. Power draw, read the thing, beam size, maths, beam quality. How do I test that? Do I just look at it?
I guess there are 2 ways of doing this. One would be diffusion, actual lighting diffusion.
Yep.
And photograph the diffusion from the subject side. And the other one is as a bounce and photograph the wall or the surface you're bouncing off of from very close to the fixture. So you're looking at the beam on the bounce from roughly the same angle as the fixture is casting the beam.
Right, okay.
And then I would set my exposure for the hottest hotspot so that you're not clipping any detail of texture, etc., etc., etc.
In the meantime, my first use of this, I'm just going to give myself some random qualities of light and see if I can do it. Basically, I've already written down that I want to have 2-to-1 diffusion or bounce. I'll make sure it's like an MCU. I've given myself an eye line. I want to do a Rembrandt pattern, all that stuff. I want to make it a fairly high key image. So I'm going to bounce. I'm going to give myself just that challenge and see if I can just do it with this light. First try. If it's catastrophic, if it's really bad, then whatever. I'll just do a bunch of, regardless, after that, I'm going to do a bunch of small incremental tests to get very familiar with the thing over time. I think that's the best thing I could possibly do with this right now while I'm not using it, if that makes sense. So I'm glad that we started off this discussion with what I actually want to use this for. Sounds to me like I have made a decent decision, which is good, but I think it's very, very important for me to be very, very aware of what I'm using it for so I can get the best out of that particular use.
I think that's at the core of any kind of both purchasing and renting decision.
Yeah.
Any kind of gear decision that you make, as in what do I need in my package for XYZ gig or job or whatever, really do need to start with what do I need to do? And by extension, what do I need my equipment to be able to do?
Yeah. And then following on from that, we discussed what I can actually do to make this more suitable to what I actually want to do. My use case is small projects that require large diffuse and large bounce, not only because I think they're just good things, but also because I want to experiment with those to develop my skills in those areas and figure out how to do it because it's so important. Extending on from that, we've discussed what I can do to make this and its flaws, namely the hotspot because of the hyperreflector, more useful to me. Sounds to me like an umbrella might be the first thing I buy. 7-foot silver umbrella that I can later find a diffusion for if I want to. They'll probably use it in a bounce or a booklet or something.
Probably hold off on the 7-foot.
Oh, okay.
Just do visualize 7 foot. Like your average door is an inch less than that, I believe.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know why I thought 7 foot was much smaller than it actually was. I don't think I need a 7-foot umbrella anytime soon.
And then 7 foot in a circle.
Oh my god, no, I don't need that at all. That would be great for 2 or 3 years from now.
5 foot might be a good starting point. Even that is probably going to surprise you by its size.
I might go with a 5 or 4 foot or something like that. On that note, we've kind of run through a few of the flaws. The hotspot's going to be an issue, but honestly, that sounds like the only major issue with this thing. It's not going to have the greatest output I've ever used. I've used 650 watt sources and everything. I've used brighter sources than this, but this is the Fresnels, the small Fresnels that we use at JMC were 150, weren't they?
300.
How did I get that incorrect? That is so far from 150.
Well, okay. I guess it's kind of like you're looking at 150 right now.
Don't question my object permanence. And then we've kind of run through
more like priming.
Priming, yeah, and being Pavloved. Have you heard of that thing? I'll mention it after I run through the summary. And we've got different ways I can test this based on the parameters. Lots of stuff has come out of this little tiny light, and I'm really looking forward to the fact that even though we've just discussed this in a lot of detail, I'm going to screw up the first test somehow in a really embarrassing way. It's inevitable, but I'll keep going. Exclusive secret for people who, speaking of priming, this is totally unrelated. Now that we're all wrapped up, I'm going to end this discussion with an exclusive secret about scissors, paper, rock that is very helpful for any you didn't know / scissors, paper, rock enthusiasts. Obviously, those audiences combine a lot, huge overlap. If you ask someone what color their shirt is before you play scissors, paper, rock with them, you initiate the round and then say, hang on, what color is your shirt? They answer you, they're all confused. It's extremely likely they'll give you scissors because you've primed them to think about fabric. And it sounds like complete bullshit, but it has worked for me 98% of the time.
What about Lizard and Spock?
Lizard and Spock. What? Can you elaborate?
Big Bang Theory?
I haven't seen Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So they've complicated it by adding Lizard and Spock.
Yeah. This is the you didn't know is now the Big Bang Theory discussion YouTube series. We're completely eliminating the rest of the cinematography and filmmaking content. We're just going to be talking about Sheldon Cooper. That's it.
Bazinga.
And end the episode there. Cut off there. That's it. That's the conclusion. We both say bazinga and the episode ends. Please, I beg you.